I never thought my life could unravel so quickly, all because of the people I thought were supposed to protect our neighborhood. The HOA, the very board that promised to maintain order and fairness, suddenly became the reason my home, the place I had poured every ounce of love, every late night, every hard-earned penny into, was slipping away from me. It started with a letter, a simple, unassuming envelope stamped with the HOA logo. I remember staring at it on my kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside me, trying to convince myself that it was probably just a routine notice. But the moment I opened it, my heart sank. The letter claimed that I owed an astronomical amount in overdue fees, tens of thousands of dollars I supposedly hadn't paid. I checked my bank statements, invoices, and payment confirmations over and over. Everything was in order. Every single payment had been made on time. Yet the letter insisted I was in violation and demanded immediate payment or face enforcement action. I called the HOA office. The voice on the other end was polite, almost too calm. They spoke in legal jargon, reminding me that failure to comply could result in fines, liens, or even the forced sale of my property. Forced sale. The words echoed in my mind like a distant scream. I had lived in that house for over 15 years. That house had seen the birth of my daughter, countless family dinners, birthdays, late-night conversations with my wife. And now, because of some paper trail they claimed existed, they were threatening to take it from me. Days turned into nights. I became obsessed with uncovering what was happening. I pored over old HOA notices, cross-checked my payments, even contacted neighbors to see if anyone had ever received a similar letter. No one had, and that's when the paranoia began to creep in. Could it be a clerical error or something far more sinister? Then I found it, a buried clause in the HOA bylaws that I had never read. It was vague, almost meaningless in everyday language, but in the hands of the board it became a weapon. They could levy fees arbitrarily, and if ignored, they could initiate the sale of a property without going through traditional foreclosure proceedings. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The power they wielded was terrifying, and it was legal. I confronted them. I demanded evidence, explanations, anything that could justify this absurd claim. The board was infuriatingly calm. They provided documents, payment ledgers, and notices I had supposedly ignored. But when I cross-referenced them with my own records, the dates didn't match. Some notices were backdated, others were completely fabricated. I tried reasoning with them, showing proof, sending emails, even threatening legal action. Each time the response was the same: polite, unwavering, dismissive. Weeks passed and the pressure mounted. The HOA began sending more aggressive letters, each one carefully worded to push me toward compliance. They even sent friendly notices suggesting that selling my home might be the easiest way to resolve the matter. That's when the first seed of fear took root. They weren't just asking, they were manipulating, orchestrating a situation where I would feel I had no choice but to sell. My lawyer confirmed it. Fighting them would be a long, expensive, uphill battle, and while I could legally challenge the notices, the process would take months, maybe years. In the meantime, the financial burden was crushing. I started to feel cornered, desperate, trapped in my own home. The place that had once felt safe was now a cage. And then came the day they presented the solution. The HOA sent a formal notice stating they had identified a buyer interested in purchasing my property at a price they deemed fair, market-adjusted, of course. It was clear: sell now or face the full weight of their fees and legal maneuvers. I agreed to meet the buyer. My hands trembled as I walked into the house I had called home for so long. I expected a stranger, a distant figure, perhaps someone curious about the neighborhood. What I didn't expect was a familiar face, someone I had seen at HOA meetings, someone whose name had been casually dropped in passing: Michael, the nephew of one of the board members. I froze. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The HOA had orchestrated this entire scenario so that their own relative could acquire my property, and they had positioned themselves to profit while making it look like I had no choice. My mind raced. Could they really do this? Was this legal? Or had I been blinded by their calm, calculated manipulation until it was too late? Michael greeted me with a practiced smile, unaware of the storm raging inside me. "I hear you're looking to sell," he said casually, as if we were talking about a car or a television set. I forced a nod, my throat dry. Every word felt like a betrayal. Every glance from him was a reminder of the deception that had been simmering behind HOA doors. The negotiations were clinical, cold, and impersonal. Numbers were thrown around, offers made and countered, each one carefully calculated to push me toward exhaustion. By the end of the meeting, it was clear I was expected to agree. And yet in the pit of my stomach, a flicker of defiance remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played, that this wasn't just about fees or legal technicalities or even money. It was about control, power, and betrayal. That night I sat alone in the dark living room, the walls around me seeming smaller than ever. Memories of laughter, of family moments, of quiet evenings by the fireplace, All of it seemed tainted by the realization that the people who were supposed to protect this community had weaponized it against me. The HOA had turned neighborly governance into a tool of manipulation, and I had been caught in their web. Sleep didn't come. My mind kept replaying every meeting, every notice, every casual smile from board members who were anything but casual behind closed doors. How could they be so cold? How could they justify this to themselves? And more importantly, how could I fight back when every path seemed designed to trap me? Over the next few days, I began digging deeper. I combed through property records, HOA filings, and even public databases, searching for anything that could expose the connections, the relationships, the hidden conflicts of interest. It wasn't easy. HOAs aren't required to be transparent about familial connections or internal dealings. But the more I searched, the clearer it became. This was a pattern. Michael wasn't just a random buyer. He was the direct beneficiary of a long game, a strategy carefully crafted by the board to enrich themselves at the expense of residents like me. I thought about confronting them outright, about calling them out publicly, about exposing the entire scheme, but fear held me back. Legal battles, public scrutiny, even social pressure. The board had all the cards, and yet I couldn't accept defeat without a fight, not just for me but for every neighbor who might one day find themselves in the same position. Then a small detail caught my attention. A single email buried in a thread that had been overlooked hinted at a meeting between Michael and several board members, scheduled weeks before the first letter ever arrived at my door. The timeline was clear. The sale wasn't coincidental. It was planned, calculated, deliberate. My blood ran cold as I realized just how far the HOA was willing to go to ensure their family benefited. I started documenting everything: emails, letters, conversations, dates, times, names. Every shred of evidence could be crucial if I decided to fight back. I even began recording meetings discreetly, capturing the board's words, their tone, the subtle ways they maneuvered to push me toward compliance. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it felt. I sensed eyes watching, subtle comments from neighbors who suddenly seemed uncomfortable. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. The HOA had built a fortress around its operations, and anyone who challenged it could feel the pressure, even without a single word being spoken directly to them. I knew the next steps would be critical. I had to tread carefully, balancing legality, strategy, and emotion. One wrong move, and the house, everything I had worked for, could be lost forever. And yet, beneath the fear, a spark of determination burned. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into handing over my home, not without a fight. And that's when I realized something chilling. The real battle wasn't just about money or property. It was about exposing the truth, about shining a light on the hidden networks of power and favoritism that could destroy ordinary lives. The HOA had underestimated me. They had assumed fear would paralyze me, that exhaustion would force my hand. But they hadn't counted on my resolve, my insistence on uncovering every secret they tried to hide. I didn't know what lay ahead. Court battles, public exposure, confrontations with powerful figures, it all loomed like a storm on the horizon. But one thing was certain: I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for justice, for accountability, for the principle that no one should be forced out of their home by a system designed to protect only a select few. And as I stared out the window that night, the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the neighborhood I had once thought safe, I made a silent vow. I would uncover every hidden connection, every secret deal, every deceitful maneuver. They may have thought they controlled the boardroom, the documents, the legal system, but they hadn't considered the power of truth. The fight had begun, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The morning after my vow, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, almost unnatural. It was as if the very streets had taken notice of my resolve, holding their breath alongside me. I poured another cup of coffee, my hands shaking slightly, and opened my laptop. The evidence I had gathered so far was like scattered pieces of a puzzle, and I was determined to see the whole picture before the HOA or Michael could tighten their grip further. I started with the emails. Each one, carefully time-stamped, painted a web far more sinister than I had imagined. Meetings between board members, coded references to project completion, and subtle notes about preferred buyers all pointed to the same truth. The HOA hadn't just coerced me into selling my house, they had orchestrated the entire transaction so that their own family could profit. I called my lawyer again, this time with a renewed sense of urgency. He listened, occasionally pausing to let the weight of the evidence sink in. "You have a strong case," he said finally, "but this will not be easy. HOA boards have a way of making residents feel powerless even when the law is clearly on their side. You need to proceed carefully." Carefully, I echoed, my voice tight with frustration. "They've already taken everything from me. They've manipulated the system, set up a relative to buy my house, and made me feel trapped. How much more careful do I have to be?" He sighed. The moment you act recklessly, they'll exploit it. Every word, every move, every confrontation will be scrutinized. You have to turn this against them strategically. I hung up, feeling both empowered and exhausted. My next steps had to be precise. I couldn't just confront them blindly. I needed leverage, undeniable proof, a way to expose the manipulation without being dragged down by it myself. Over the next several days, I became consumed with research. Property records, corporate filings, HOA bylaws, even social media profiles, nothing escaped my scrutiny. Every connection I uncovered felt like another thread in a tangled web of deceit. I discovered shell companies, hidden contracts, and financial transactions that suggested a far-reaching plan designed to funnel wealth toward board members' families. It was chilling to see the extent of their reach. But then came a turning point. While going through public property records, I noticed something peculiar. The timing of Michael's application to purchase my house coincided almost exactly with a sudden change in HOA fee assessments. Fees that were suddenly applied retroactively, all conveniently timed to put pressure on me. It wasn't just coercion. It was calculated, precise, and designed to create the illusion that selling was my only viable option. I felt a surge of anger, hotter and sharper than anything I had felt before. The very people who were supposed to maintain fairness in our community had weaponized it against me. They had used the law, the neighborhood, and even my own memories against me. But now I had evidence, the dates, the documents, the emails, a chain of proof that could expose the manipulation for what it truly was. Still, fear lingered. I began noticing small things around my house: cars parked too long, neighbors glancing my way a little too often, subtle questions about my activities. It wasn't paranoia. I knew the HOA had a network and I was now a target. Every step I took had to be measured, calculated, deliberate. Then I received a phone call that made my blood run cold. The voice was unfamiliar, calm, and chillingly composed. "You shouldn't dig too deep," the person said. "Some things are better left alone. You're making enemies you don't understand." I hung up immediately, my heart racing. Whoever it was, they knew exactly what I was doing. The threat was clear, though the tone was almost polite, the kind of politeness that feels colder than outright anger. I realized just how dangerous this situation had become. This wasn't just about property or fees anymore, it was about power, control, and intimidation. Despite the fear, I pressed forward. I decided to reach out to neighbors carefully, one by one. I needed allies, people who had experienced similar pressures or had noticed irregularities in HOA behavior. To my relief, some responded, quietly confirming suspicions I had only hinted at. Stories of manipulated fees, coerced sales, and favoritism toward board members' families emerged like whispers in the night. It became clear that the HOA's pattern wasn't isolated, it was systemic. I was just one of many residents caught in their web. And while that realization was frightening, it also strengthened my resolve. If I could gather enough testimonies, if I could show that this wasn't a single act of malice but a coordinated pattern, then I had a chance to fight back. I decided to confront Michael directly, though cautiously. I requested a meeting under the guise of discussing property details. When he arrived, I noticed the same practiced smile, the same casual demeanor, as if he were completely unaware of the turmoil I had endured. But this time I had the evidence and I wasn't going to be intimidated. I laid out the timeline step by step with documents, emails, and records. Michael's expression flickered, a flash of surprise quickly masked by indifference. "I'm just the buyer," he said smoothly. "I didn't orchestrate anything. The HOA handles these matters." "You're not naive," I replied quietly, keeping my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "You know exactly why this happened. Your family stands to benefit. You can deny it, but the proof is here." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he leaned back, a subtle smirk forming. "If you go public, if you try to challenge this, things could get messy for you. Are you sure you want to risk everything?" I swallowed hard. He was right. Taking this further could mean legal battles, public scrutiny, even personal danger, but I couldn't stop now. I had come too far, uncovered too much to let fear silence me. I left the meeting feeling both empowered and wary. Michael might have been the visible player, but the board, the HOA itself, was the real force to reckon with, and I had only scratched the surface of their influence. That night I began drafting a plan. Every meeting, every document, every witness statement, all had to be organized. I had to be ready for a legal challenge, a public exposure, or any tactic the HOA might use to discredit me. The stakes were higher than I had imagined, but so was my determination. Days later, I noticed subtle changes. Notices about my payments seemed less aggressive, almost cautious. I realized that someone, perhaps Michael, perhaps a cautious board member, was aware that I was building a case, and that gave me a small, bitter satisfaction. They weren't invincible. But the real shock came when I dug deeper into Michael's background. A series of corporate filings, previously unnoticed, revealed a direct financial connection between him and several board members. Contracts, loans, and profit-sharing arrangements that were cleverly obscured but unmistakable. The buyer wasn't just a relative in name. He was part of a carefully designed financial network, the centerpiece of a scheme meant to extract value from unsuspecting homeowners. I felt a mixture of anger, disbelief, and grim satisfaction. The truth was undeniable. The HOA had orchestrated the entire scenario, from inflated fees to selective notices to planting their own relative as the buyer, all designed to manipulate me into surrendering my home. But fear still lingered. I was dealing with powerful people who understood the system and how to exploit it. Every step I took had to be deliberate, strategic, and untraceable. One wrong move could undo everything. Then, a breakthrough. I discovered an overlooked loophole in the HOA bylaws, a procedural error that could invalidate their forced sale. It was small, technical, almost insignificant on the surface, but it was enough to challenge the legality of their actions. If used correctly, it could buy me time, leverage, and possibly turn the tables entirely. I prepared carefully. Copies of all evidence, a meticulously detailed timeline, witness statements, everything I needed to confront the HOA with undeniable proof that they had manipulated me, breached their own rules, and orchestrated a personal profit scheme. The night before the confrontation, I couldn't sleep. Memories of the home, the board's cold smiles, Michael's practiced demeanor, and the subtle threats over the phone all collided into a storm of emotion. Fear, anger, determination, and grief blended into a single, burning resolve. By morning, I was ready. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting to expose corruption, manipulation, and betrayal, a fight that could affect the entire neighborhood and possibly set a precedent for anyone else caught in the HOA's web. And as I stepped out the door, documents in hand, I felt the weight of what was about to happen. The board had underestimated me, assumed fear would control my actions, believed their carefully laid plans would proceed without resistance. But I had one advantage they didn't anticipate: the truth. The confrontation was inevitable, the storm was coming, and I was determined to see it through no matter the cost. The day had begun like any other, with the sun spilling its pale light over the quiet streets of my neighborhood, yet the air felt charged, electric, as if it sensed the storm that was about to erupt within the polished walls of the HOA office. Clutching a thick folder of documents, I walked through the familiar streets with a measured calm, but my mind raced with strategy, fear, and a resolute determination that had taken root deep in the marrow of my being. I had spent weeks compiling evidence, unraveling the hidden threads of manipulation, and now, finally, it was time to confront those who had tried to strip me of my home. As I entered the HOA office, I was met with the sterile smell of clean surfaces and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. The board members sat behind their polished desks, faces serene, their carefully crafted expressions designed to convey authority and composure. But beneath the practiced calm, I could sense a ripple of tension, a subtle unease that betrayed their awareness that this confrontation would not be ordinary. For years, they had relied on intimidation, procedural complexity, and the illusion of control. Today, they faced someone armed not with fear but with irrefutable evidence. I began methodically placing the documents before them, spreading the timeline of manipulation, coercion, and deception across the tabletop. Every letter, email, fee notice, and property record was meticulously arranged to reveal the pattern they had hoped to conceal. Retroactive fees, selective enforcement of rules, and the orchestrated positioning of Michael, a relative of key board members, as the buyer of my house, all revealed a system designed for personal gain at my expense. "You've spent a great deal of time compiling these," said Michael's uncle, his voice smooth, measured, and unshakable, yet there was a faint tremor in the corner of his eye, quickly masked by practiced control. "But you must understand, HOA governance is complex. Rules, fees, compliance, everything follows procedures we have established over decades." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze steadily. "Rules? No, these are tools of coercion weaponized to manipulate residents into compliance. You applied fees retroactively, created false narratives of debt, and then positioned your own relative as the buyer of my home. That is not governance, that is corruption." The room shifted imperceptibly. Board members exchanged fleeting glances, almost imperceptible, yet revealing a collective recognition that the carefully constructed illusion of authority was beginning to fracture. I sensed the subtle vibrations of unease ripple beneath the surface, the veneer of control cracking under the weight of undeniable evidence. Michael, attempting to maintain his usual composed demeanor, now betrayed subtle signs of tension. The slight tightening of his jaw, the rigid posture, the carefully measured breathing, tiny details I had learned to read. He was the centerpiece of their scheme, and yet the evidence I held left no room for pretense. Step by step, I presented the connections. Michael's loans, the profit-sharing agreements, the secret communications with board members before any notices were sent, and the carefully orchestrated timing of my coerced sale. Each piece of evidence struck like a hammer against the fragile scaffolding of lies. You're suggesting," Michael stammered, trying to maintain composure, but the faltering tone betrayed the pretense. "I'm presenting facts," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "Facts backed by documents, timelines, and witness statements. The transaction was orchestrated. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a plan executed to profit your family." A heavy silence filled the room, so dense it seemed to press against our ears and chests. One by one, the board members' composure began to crumble, micro-expressions of shock and anxiety flashing across their faces, quickly masked by practiced politeness but visible to a trained eye. They had underestimated me. They assumed fear would keep me compliant, that exhaustion would make me surrender, and that their relative would claim my house without scrutiny. Then I revealed the discovery that shook the room further. A clause buried deep in an ancillary contract, a detail almost invisible, revealed Michael's financial dependence on key board members. The pretense of his independence as a buyer dissolved under the scrutiny of the documents. The HOA had misrepresented familial ties in a legal attempt to bypass accountability, turning a simple property sale into a calculated financial scheme. I held up the document, letting the room absorb the gravity. "This proves it beyond doubt. Michael was never independent. Every move, every notice, every fee orchestrated by your board to profit from my misfortune." The tension in the room was palpable. A quiet panic replaced the calm that had long defined the board's authority. I could feel it like a vibration in the air, a sense of impending collapse. Their power relied on fear and secrecy. Now that structure was being methodically dismantled piece by piece. Then, unexpectedly, a longtime neighbor, someone who had silently observed the HOA's behavior for years, stepped forward. He presented documents of his own, detailing selective fees, coerced sales, and favoritism. "You are not alone," he said firmly. "This pattern has existed for years. It must be exposed." The board's composure began to crumble further. Their calculated strategies of control, their carefully orchestrated intimidation, were failing. The power dynamic had shifted, and I was not alone in seeking justice. Others had quietly observed, gathered evidence, and now, collectively, our voices could no longer be ignored. The weight of anger, betrayal, and vindication surged through me. 15 years of my life, memories, and milestones had been threatened. Now the truth was finally taking shape, tangible and undeniable. Michael's calm pretense faltered as he realized that his carefully orchestrated advantage had been neutralized. The confrontation escalated. The board members scrambled to regain control, attempting damage control and subtle threats, but I anticipated every move. I presented every piece of evidence, every timeline, every witness account. Their attempts at intimidation fell flat. The truth, laid bare and undeniable, was overwhelming. Then came a grudging admission from the uncle. Perhaps some procedures were not followed correctly, mistakes were made. Not the apology I craved, not the acknowledgement of full culpability, but it was enough. Enough to initiate legal scrutiny, halt the sale, and expose the board's manipulations. Michael's connection, once hidden, was now laid bare. The orchestrated sale could no longer proceed without scrutiny. Even as the initial shock passed, the emotional toll lingered. The betrayal, subtle and pervasive, had left scars. The memories of the home, once safe and comforting, now bore the mark of manipulation. Yet, amid the tension and fatigue, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I had confronted fear, unraveled deceit, and reclaimed a measure of control. In the following days, the neighborhood began to shift. Residents who had quietly endured manipulation began speaking out, sharing their experiences, corroborating my findings, and collectively demanding accountability. The HOA, once untouchable, was forced into caution. Authority was no longer absolute, transparency became necessary. The fight had never been solely about the house. It had been about exposing systemic manipulation, asserting integrity, and defending the principle of fairness. The house was merely the stage for a battle that tested courage, patience, and meticulous strategy. The psychological and emotional impact remained. Sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and the lingering fear of retaliation weighed heavily, but resilience had grown alongside my resolve. Every sleepless hour, every document, every confrontation fortified my determination. Michael, once the linchpin of the HOA's scheme, faded into the background as legal scrutiny intensified and community oversight increased. His advantage, built on deception and familial ties, was dismantled. The coerced sale was paused and the manipulative network exposed. The final act unfolded quietly but powerfully. Public notices were circulated, detailing procedural errors, conflicts of interest, and systemic favoritism within the HOA. Legal counsel confirmed the coerced sale had violated bylaws and would be reviewed thoroughly. The community was now fully aware of the manipulations. The HOA could no longer hide behind authority, and the residents, once passive, now held the power to demand accountability. Returning home that evening, I felt the streets themselves breathe differently, lighter, freer. The house, the memories, the integrity of the process, all preserved. The confrontation had achieved more than restitution. It had created a precedent for vigilance, documentation, and courage in the face of systemic deception. As I sat in my living room, I reflected on the journey. Fear had been constant, yet determination had prevailed. Anger had fueled my vigilance, and patience had allowed me to compile the evidence necessary to confront manipulation. The battle was exhausting, but it ended with clarity, accountability, and moral victory. The HOA, once a symbol of unchecked authority, had been exposed. Michael's complicity, previously hidden, was revealed, and I had stood firm, facing intimidation, coercion, and calculated manipulation to reclaim my home and restore a measure of justice. The neighborhood itself transformed. Conversations that were once guarded became open discussions of accountability and oversight. Awareness spread like wildfire, a collective recognition that even trusted institutions could be corrupted if left unchecked. My confrontation had sparked a ripple effect, empowering the community to demand transparency. Even as weeks passed, the emotional toll lingered. Betrayal leaves scars that take time to fade. Yet, in the midst of exhaustion and reflection, I recognized the deeper victory, reclaiming agency, exposing corruption, and defending the principles of fairness and truth. In the quiet aftermath, the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, one tempered with vigilance. The HOA remained, but its authority was no longer absolute. The power of manipulation had been challenged, and the community now demanded accountability. The house, my home, remained a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience, courage, and the triumph of persistence over coercion. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the familiar streets, I felt a profound sense of closure. Betrayal had been confronted, manipulation exposed, and integrity restored, yet vigilance remained essential. The fight had been long, exhausting, and fraught with risk, but it ended with clarity, accountability, and moral vindication. I leaned back in my chair, reflecting on the lessons learned. Trust must be earned, authority must be scrutinized, and courage must be unwavering in the face of manipulation. The HOA had underestimated a single resident willing to confront them. In doing so, they had inadvertently empowered an entire community to demand justice. The house, once threatened, stood resilient. The memories, once at risk, were preserved, and the community, once passive, had discovered the power of truth and collective action. The battle had been more than personal, it had become a testament to the strength of vigilance, courage, and persistence. And as night fell over the neighborhood, a quiet sense of peace settled in, fragile yet undeniable. The HOA may still exist, but its power had been challenged, its deception revealed, and its attempts to manipulate had been neutralized. Truth had prevailed, and justice, slow and hard-won, had been restored. I exhaled, finally allowing the weight of the months-long struggle to leave my chest. The fight had been long, the revelations shocking, and the emotional toll immense. But the outcome reaffirmed a simple truth: even the most entrenched power can crumble under the weight of careful, persistent exposure and unwavering courage. The journey had been harrowing, filled with suspense, fear, and moral tension, yet it concluded with clarity. The HOA's manipulation was laid bare. Michael's advantage had been neutralized. The community had awakened to accountability. And in the quiet, reflective moments that followed, I recognized that I had reclaimed more than a house. I had reclaimed agency, dignity, and a moral victory that no deception could take away.